It was a freezing December night when Officer Sarah Martinez, 27, was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. While patrolling alone through the south side of Chicago, one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods, she didn't know she'd been followed for hours by 3 hooded men. She was about to enter a dark alley to investigate suspicious sounds when a dirty hand grabbed her arm, dragging her behind a dumpster. A rough voice whispered in her ear not to speak. It was Marcus Johnson, 50 years old, homeless for 10 years, whom everyone in the neighborhood called Crazy Marcus. But what Marcus had seen that night, 3 corrupt cops preparing a deadly trap for Sarah, would unleash a chain of events that would expose one of the biggest police scandals in Chicago's history. Because sometimes the person society discards as crazy is the only one sane enough to see the truth that everyone else pretends not to notice. Officer Sarah Martinez checked her watch. 2:40 a.m. The South Side streets were deserted, lit only by streetlights that cast ominous shadows on building walls. She had been patrolling these tough Chicago neighborhoods for 2 years, but tonight something felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if danger lurked around every corner. At 27, Sarah was one of the most respected officers at the 12th District Precinct. A graduate of Northwestern University with a degree in criminal justice, she had chosen the badge over a comfortable law firm job because she believed in justice. Her colleagues respected her, but some considered her too idealistic, too rigid about following the rules, especially after she'd refused to look the other way on certain irregularities she'd noticed in recent months. Marcus Johnson had been watching the officer for an hour, hidden behind garbage dumpsters. At 50, his long gray hair, unkempt beard, and worn clothes made him look like any vagrant, but his brown eyes were still sharp, alert, capable of seeing things others missed. He'd been living on the streets for 10 years, ever since he'd lost everything: job, home, family. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him as Crazy Marcus, but Marcus was anything but crazy. That night, he'd seen something that chilled his blood. 3 plainclothes men, but with the unmistakable bearing of police officers, were preparing something in the alley off Roosevelt Road. He'd recognized them: Captain Steve Wilson, Detective Mike Torres, and Sergeant Tony DeMarco. He'd seen them before in recent months, always at night, always in places they shouldn't be. Marcus knew Sarah Martinez was different from the others. He'd observed her during her shifts. She was the only one who stopped to talk with the homeless, who didn't treat them like trash. The only one who still believed police should protect everyone, even those society had discarded. When he saw Sarah heading toward the alley where the 3 corrupt cops had prepared their trap, Marcus didn't hesitate. He emerged from his hiding spot and followed her, moving silently as he'd learned to do during years of street life. Sarah had heard sounds coming from the alley. Her instinct told her to call for backup, but her radio was acting up with strange interference that night. She headed toward the alley entrance when a strong hand grabbed her arm, dragging her behind a dumpster. The voice that whispered for her not to speak was rough but not threatening. It was Marcus explaining the situation quickly. It was a trap. 3 cops were waiting for her. They knew her patrol routes and had disabled her radio. Sarah looked at the man who had stopped her and recognized the homeless person everyone called crazy. But in his eyes, she didn't see madness. She saw fear. Fear for her. When she checked her radio, she discovered it was indeed out of order. Voices came from the alley. Sarah recognized Captain Wilson's voice asking someone on the phone where the hell she was. She should have been there 10 minutes ago. She felt her world crashing down. Her superiors, men she trusted, were plotting against her. Marcus told her to follow him, that he knew these places better than anyone, and could get her to safety. Sarah hesitated for a moment. All her years of training told her not to trust a stranger, but instinct told her this man had just saved her life. She agreed to follow him. Marcus began moving silently through the shadows, with Sarah behind him. As they moved away, both knew that night had marked the beginning of something much bigger and more dangerous than they could imagine. Marcus led Sarah through a maze of alleys and courtyards she didn't know existed, despite patrolling that area for 2 years. They moved like ghosts in the night, avoiding main streets and lit areas. Marcus knew every corner, every service door, every hiding place. It was the invisible world of the homeless, parallel to the normal one, but completely ignored by society. They stopped in front of an old abandoned warehouse on Ashland Avenue. Marcus moved some metal sheets and revealed a hidden entrance. The interior was surprising. He had transformed the space into a kind of refuge, with clean mattresses, candles, even some books on improvised shelves. It was sparse but tidy, the antithesis of what people imagined about places where homeless people lived. Sarah asked why he lived there, and Marcus replied it was a long story. First, they needed to deal with her problem. They sat down while Marcus lit a candle, illuminating his face in the flickering light. Sarah began to realize the weight of what had just happened. She couldn't believe that Captain Wilson, who had known her since she joined the force and had been her mentor, could be plotting against her. Marcus explained with bitter experience that people change when big money is involved. He'd learned to recognize the look of those who sell their souls. When Sarah asked how he knew about this corruption and who he really was, Marcus hesitated before answering. The revelation was shocking. 10 years ago, he was Chief Detective Marcus Johnson of Chicago PD's Organized Crime Unit. Sarah recognized the name. He was a legend. A cop who had dedicated his life to fighting organized crime, who had mysteriously disappeared years earlier in an explosion. Marcus explained that the explosion had been staged. He'd discovered a corruption network that went from the streets to the top floors of headquarters. When he tried to report everything, the corrupt cops had reacted by faking his death. He'd been forced to live in hiding, pretending to be crazy to avoid being actually killed. The story he told was terrible. He'd never come forward because he didn't know who to trust. And who would believe a dead man who'd become homeless? Sarah began to understand. She'd started asking questions about cases closed too quickly, about money disappearing from operations. She was making the same mistake he'd made 10 years ago. But this time, things could be different. Marcus got up and pulled out a metal box full of photographs, documents, recordings. 10 years of observations, everything he'd managed to collect living on the streets, listening to conversations, following the corrupt cops. Sarah looked at the documents with growing amazement. Photos of secret meetings, recordings of compromising conversations, evidence of illegal payments. It was a treasure trove of information that could dismantle the entire network. When she asked why he'd never used all this, Marcus explained he was just a crazy homeless man against the system. But now there was her, a clean cop with access from the inside. Together, they could do it. Marcus explained that 10 years ago he'd taken an oath to protect and serve. It didn't matter if he no longer wore the uniform, that oath still stood. At that moment, they heard noises outside. Marcus immediately blew out the candle and signaled Sarah to be quiet. Through a crack, they saw flashlights searching the area. They'd been found and had to run again. As they prepared to flee into the night, Sarah realized she wasn't just running from corrupt cops. She was entering a war that had been going on for 10 years, and Marcus Johnson, the man everyone believed was dead, was her only ally. Dawn found Marcus and Sarah hidden in another refuge, an abandoned basement near Union Station. Marcus had a network of hideouts throughout Chicago, the result of 10 years of clandestine life. While Sarah tried to process everything she'd discovered, Marcus prepared a strategic plan. He showed Sarah a city map full of annotations, explaining that the corruption network had 3 levels: small dealers who paid not to be arrested, mid-level traffickers with agreements with some detectives, and at the top, something much bigger. He pulled out telephoto photographs showing Captain Wilson meeting men in expensive suits outside luxury restaurants, large cars with foreign plates, briefcases changing hands. It was international trafficking, drugs, Weapons, maybe worse. Chicago was just a hub, a transit point. Marcus explained he'd spent 10 years building a network of informants. Other homeless people, some honest cops who suspected something but didn't dare move alone. The homeless were perfect observers, invisible to society. They could move freely, listen to conversations, see secret meetings. But to bring all this down, they needed concrete evidence and someone from inside the system. Sarah had to return to the precinct, pretend nothing had happened. If she didn't show up for work, she'd confirm the corrupt cops' suspicions. Marcus had studied everyone at Sarah's precinct. He identified 3 clean officers, Detective Anna Foster, Sergeant Joe Murphy, and Officer David Chen. Sarah had to approach them gradually, without arousing suspicion. He gave her a small encrypted communication device to stay in contact. If something went wrong, they'd disappear like 10 years ago. But this time, Marcus wouldn't give up. 2 hours later, Sarah entered the 12th District Precinct, with her heart pounding. Captain Wilson saw her and approached with what seemed like genuine relief, asking where she'd been after losing radio contact. Sarah responded naturally that there had been technical problems, that the radio had malfunctioned and she'd had to finish her shift without communications. Wilson studied her carefully, noting she seemed tense. She explained it had been a difficult shift on the south side. Wilson nodded, but his gaze remained suspicious. He gave her the day off, telling her to rest. As Sarah headed to her locker, she noticed Detective Torres and Sergeant DeMarco watching her from a distance. They knew something didn't add up, but couldn't accuse her without revealing their true intentions. Sarah realized the game had just begun. She had Marcus on her side, but was surrounded by enemies who knew her every move. She had to be perfect, because one mistake would mean death for both of them. In the following days, Sarah began the most delicate phase of her life, pretending normalcy, while secretly building an alliance. Every morning she entered the precinct, greeting colleagues she knew wanted her dead. Every evening she went out to meet Marcus in one of his refuges.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The first contact was with Detective Anna Foster. Sarah invited her for coffee after their shift, at a diner far from the precinct. Anna was a 40-year-old woman, divorced, who had dedicated her life to work. She was respected for her integrity, but also feared for her direct character. Sarah had to be cautious and couldn't reveal everything immediately. She told Anna she'd noticed irregularities in some cases, arrests that fell through at the last moment, evidence that disappeared, informants who stopped cooperating. Anna confirmed she'd noticed the same things, but when she'd asked questions, they'd told her to mind her own business. It was the opening Sarah hoped for. When she asked what Anna would say if she revealed who was behind it, Anna replied it would be a dangerous conversation. Sarah couldn't talk about Marcus yet, but she shared some information about the corruption network starting from their precinct. Anna asked for names, but Sarah said she was still gathering evidence. Anna nodded slowly, promising her help, but recommending caution. The second contact was harder. Joe Murphy was an old-school cop, suspicious by nature. Sarah approached him during a break while he smoked in the precinct courtyard. When she asked if he'd ever felt something wasn't right, Joe replied that in 25 years, he'd learned that asking too many questions could be dangerous. But he confirmed he'd always had that feeling, especially in recent years. When Sarah asked what he'd do if someone had evidence, Joe said it would depend on who that someone was and how reliable the evidence was. He was interested, but cautious. The third ally, David Chen, was the easiest to convince. At 28, he was still full of ideals. When Sarah spoke to him about her suspicions, he confessed he'd noticed the same things, but thought he was being paranoid. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his work in the shadows. His network of homeless informants provided valuable information. He discovered the corrupt cops were planning something big, an operation that would bring a $50 million drug shipment to Chicago. It was their chance. If they could document this operation and prove the corrupt cops' involvement, they'd have enough evidence to bring everything down. The shipment was supposed to arrive in a week, at night from the port of Long Beach, transported to Chicago, with the corrupt cops ensuring no checkpoints along the route. They had a week to prepare everything. A week to turn suspicions into concrete evidence. A week to risk everything in an operation that could save them or kill them. When Marcus asked if the new allies were ready, Sarah confirmed Anna and Joe were available. David was enthusiastic, but inexperienced. Marcus smiled with determination. 10 years of preparation were about to pay off. While planning the operation details, both knew they were about to play the most important game of their lives. But for the first time in 10 years, Marcus felt like a cop again. And Sarah, despite her fear, felt she was on the right side of justice. The week of preparation flew by. Sarah, Anna, Joe, and David formed a secret team within the precinct, communicating through codes Marcus had taught them. Meanwhile, the homeless network gathered information on the corrupt cops' movements. The night of the operation arrived charged with tension. The drug shipment was supposed to reach Chicago at 3 a.m., coming through the Dan Ryan Expressway. The corrupt cops had organized everything. Patrol units diverted, checkpoints suspended, clear roads. Marcus had positioned his informants along the entire route. Sarah and her allies were ready with hidden cameras and recording devices. It was an operation requiring millimeter precision. During the final briefing in Marcus's refuge, everyone knew they had to not only document the drug's passage, but prove the active involvement of corrupt police officers. If something went wrong, they'd run and start over. But they wouldn't get another chance like this. At 11 p.m., everyone was in position. Sarah was officially homesick, but was actually hidden near the highway checkpoint. Joe and David were on patrol in strategic areas, with orders keeping them away from the drug route. Anna was most exposed. She had to stay at the precinct to document internal communications. At 2:30 a.m., Marcus's network began reporting movement. A convoy of 3 black vans was proceeding along the highway, escorted by police cars. These weren't normal patrols. They were corrupt cops, providing protection. Sarah saw Captain Wilson in his personal car preceding the convoy, coordinating the operation by phone. Detective Torres and Sergeant DeMarco were in other cars, strategically positioned. Marcus, hidden on an overpass, filmed everything with a professional camera. They were documenting the use of official resources for a criminal operation. It was definitive proof. But at 3:15 a.m., something went wrong. An unauthorized patrol, 2 honest officers on normal duty, crossed paths with the convoy and became suspicious, seeing the coordinated movement without official explanation. They called dispatch for information, and their communication was intercepted by the corrupt cops. Captain Wilson immediately understood there was a problem and ordered the convoy to change route. By changing course to avoid unexpected checkpoints, the corrupt cops made a fatal error. They diverted to an industrial area where Marcus had positioned 3 of his best informants. The homeless, invisible in the night, managed to film the entire unloading operation at an abandoned warehouse. Sarah, following Marcus's directions, arrived in time to document the crucial moment. Wilson speaking directly with traffickers, Torres coordinating security, DeMarco personally checking some drug packages. They had everything they needed. But while documenting the final moments, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with Officer Lisa Rodriguez, a colleague she'd always considered a friend, pointing a gun at her. Lisa explained that for 5 years, she'd been the eyes and ears of the corrupt superiors. Did she really think their secret conversations went unnoticed? Marcus, from the other side of the warehouse, saw the scene through the camera. Sarah was in danger, and he was the only one who could save her. After 10 years of hiding, it was time to come out in the open. He emerged from hiding with his hands raised, introducing himself as Detective Marcus Johnson, and arresting Lisa. She turned surprised, recognizing the man everyone believed was dead. In that moment of distraction, Sarah managed to disarm her. Anna, Joe, and David arrived as backup, surrounding the area. The corrupt cops had been caught red-handed, and Marcus Johnson had finally returned from the dead to claim his justice. The dawn of the next day was different from all others in the past 10 years. Marcus Johnson walked again through the corridors of a police station, this time as the hero who had exposed the biggest corruption network in Chicago police history. The evidence collected was overwhelming. Hours of video recordings, phone intercepts, documents, testimonies. Captain Wilson, Detective Torres, Sergeant DeMarco, and Officer Rodriguez were arrested along with 12 other corrupt cops. The operation led to the seizure of $50 million in drugs and dismantled an international criminal network. But the most incredible story was that of Marcus Johnson. Newspapers headlined about the ghost detective who returned from the dead to serve justice. His story of 10 years lived as a homeless man to escape corrupt cops and gather evidence became legend. During the reinstatement ceremony, the chief asked how it felt to be an official police officer again. Marcus, now clean-shaven and in a new uniform, smiled looking at Sarah seated in the front row. He replied that he felt like he'd never stopped being one. The ceremony was emotional. Marcus received a promotion to detective captain and the Medal of Valor. The most touching moment was when all the homeless from the neighborhood arrived to greet the man who had lived with them and now represented their voice in the official world. In his speech, Marcus said he would never forget where he came from. Those 10 years on the street had taught him that justice isn't a privilege for those with power, but a right for everyone, even those society considers invisible. Sarah was promoted to detective and became Marcus's deputy in the new anti-corruption unit. Anna Foster was appointed captain of the 12th District Precinct. Joe Murphy received a commendation before retirement. David Chen became Marcus's personal assistant. The most important change was in mentality. Marcus and Sarah's story proved that corruption can be defeated when honest people decide to risk everything for truth. 6 months later, Marcus walked again through the South Side streets, but this time wearing his uniform and earning everyone's respect. The homeless greeted him with affection, citizens thanked him, criminals feared him. During a patrol with Sarah, she asked if he ever regretted those years. Marcus stopped in front of the dumpster, where he'd hidden 10 years earlier. He explained that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. He'd lost his official identity, but found his soul again. When Sarah asked what they'd do now, Marcus replied they still had a lot of work. That was just one network. There were others. That evening, in Marcus's former refuge, transformed into a homeless shelter, a special celebration was held. There were honest police officers, homeless people, ordinary citizens, all together celebrating a victory that belonged to everyone. Marcus looked at that scene thinking how incredible the journey that brought him there had been. From detective captain to crazy homeless man, from society's invisible to national hero. But he'd learned the most important lesson on the street. True strength doesn't come from power, but from the determination to do the right thing, even when everything seems lost. He raised a glass of water for a toast to all those who never stop believing in justice, even when justice seems to have forgotten them. In that moment, everyone understood that sometimes real heroes are those society considers crazy, because it takes a little madness to believe one man can change the world. But when that man finds allies who share his madness, miracles become possible. Marcus Johnson had proven that no matter how low you fall, you can always get back up and fight for what you believe in, and that sometimes, to save the system, you first have to become invisible to that system's eyes. Justice had won, and for once, the good guys had truly triumphed over the bad guys. Like if you believe justice can always triumph, comment which moment of the story struck you most. Share to inspire those who never stop fighting for what's right. Subscribe for more stories of unlikely heroes and winning justice. Sometimes those society discards can see the truth better than everyone else. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself again. And sometimes the most unlikely alliance can change the world. Because real heroes aren't those who never fall, but those who always get back up.